In February 1945, during the final months of World War II, the German city of Dresden experienced one of the most devastating bombing attacks of the entire war. At the time, Dresden was known as a historic cultural city filled with beautiful architecture and thousands of civilians. However, as the war intensified, Allied forces began targeting German cities to weaken the country's remaining war infrastructure. On the night of February 13, 1945, hundreds of Allied bombers appeared in the skies above Dresden. Within minutes, the city was engulfed in explosions and flames. Bombs rained down across the city while massive fires began spreading through the streets. What followed that night would become one of the most destructive air raids of World War II. As the Allied bombers reached Dresden, the attack began with devastating precision. Waves of bomber aircraft dropped large numbers of explosive and incendiary bombs across the city. The explosions destroyed buildings, railway stations, and military facilities. At the same time, incendiary bombs started massive fires across the city streets. Within a short time, dozens of separate fires began spreading across Dresden. The combination of explosions and fire quickly turned the historic city into a massive battlefield of smoke and destruction. Civilians rushed to shelters while firefighters struggled to control the growing flames. However, the bombing raid had only just begun. As the fires across Dresden continued spreading, a terrifying phenomenon began to form. The intense heat from hundreds of fires combined together, creating a massive firestorm that swept across the city. Powerful winds were pulled toward the center of the flames, feeding the fires with more oxygen and making them burn even stronger. Buildings collapsed as the firestorm spread through entire neighborhoods. People caught in the streets struggled to escape the intense heat and smoke. The firestorm became so powerful that it could be seen from miles away. By the end of the night, large parts of Dresden had been completely destroyed. Only a few hours after the first bombing raid, another massive wave of Allied bombers arrived over Dresden. The city was already burning from the earlier attack, but the second wave of aircraft dropped even more bombs across the area. Explosions continued destroying buildings while fires spread rapidly through entire neighborhoods. Rescue teams and firefighters struggled to control the flames, but the destruction was overwhelming. As bombs continued falling across the city, the fires grew stronger and began merging into one enormous blaze. Dresden was now completely engulfed in flames. The bombing had turned the once peaceful city into a massive inferno visible from far across the surrounding countryside. During the bombing of Dresden, thousands of civilians were trapped inside the city as the attacks continued. Many people rushed into underground shelters, basements, and subway tunnels in an attempt to escape the explosions and fires. However, the firestorm created intense heat and thick smoke that spread across large areas of the city. Streets were blocked by burning buildings and debris, making it extremely difficult for people to escape. Emergency services struggled to reach many areas as the fires continued spreading. For civilians trapped inside the burning city, the night became a desperate fight for survival. By the morning after the bombing raids, large parts of Dresden had been completely destroyed. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, while historic buildings and landmarks were badly damaged or burned. The fires continued burning for hours, and thick smoke covered the city skyline. Rescue teams began searching through the ruins for survivors as the scale of the destruction became clear. The bombing of Dresden became one of the most devastating air raids of World War II. The attack shocked many people and later sparked debates about the use of large-scale bombing against cities during the war. When the bombing raids finally ended, the city of Dresden was left in ruins. As the sun rose the next morning, rescue teams and survivors began moving through the destroyed streets. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, while large areas of the city were still burning. Many historic buildings and cultural landmarks that had stood for centuries were heavily damaged or completely destroyed. Survivors searched through the ruins for family members and friends, while emergency workers tried to rescue people trapped beneath collapsed buildings. The scale of destruction shocked those who witnessed the aftermath. What had once been a beautiful historic city had now become one of the most devastated locations in Europe during the war. News of the destruction in Dresden quickly spread across Europe and the rest of the world. While the bombing had been intended to weaken Germany's ability to continue fighting the war, the massive destruction of the city raised difficult questions. Some military leaders believed the attack helped speed up the end of the war by damaging Germany's transportation and military infrastructure. Others argued that the scale of destruction in a city filled with civilians made the bombing highly controversial. Historians and researchers have continued debating the Dresden bombing for decades. The attack remains one of the most discussed air raids of World War II. Today, the bombing of Dresden remains one of the most powerful reminders of the devastating impact of modern warfare. The city was later rebuilt, and many of its historic buildings were carefully restored over time. Memorials and museums now stand in Dresden to remember the lives lost during the bombing raids. These sites help ensure that the events of the war are not forgotten. The story of Dresden serves as a reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of remembering history so that future generations can learn from the past.